Okay, so it's been a year since we launched the Second Wind YouTube channel, and it's been a joy to be part of directing the visual design for the whole project. Starting a YouTube channel from scratch is an exciting opportunity since it gives us the chance to write our own rules when it comes to the visual look and feel of the page. As someone who has worked in the YouTube scene for a while, this was a dream project. From the beginning, premium content was always the goal, meaning content that screams intentionality with a clear voice and tone, with some strong design principles to accompany this. Alongside the core pillar of personality, as we're a personality-driven gaming channel, this pillar of premium helped establish our two headlights we needed to get through the dark. The two P's. PP. This is a short look at some of the thought processes behind the design of Second Wind's suite of shows. When it came to the Second Wind logo itself, I was set on a phoenix design from the get-go. After a little trial and error and some back and forth with the team, we opted for more of a classy, wispy approach rather than a hard edge for the bird itself. When looking closer, you can see that the bird is made up of the same single shape, a little wispy feather that also ended up lending itself to the opening splash animation as well as a brand pattern. With all this locked in, we had our full suite of design components. A logo, a brand mark, a brand pattern, with some animation opportunities. A great starting point. Next, it was time to design Yahtzee Crowshaw's new show, fully Ramblematic. My first rendition of this design was definitely a departure from Yahtzee's classic look. I took Yahtzee's FU approach to content and attempted something more bouncy and comic. The team liked it, but suggested that it didn't quite hit our two P's correctly. We needed to make this slightly more premium with a clearer personality. All great feedback. So with that, I simplified it down and attempted to make it feel a bit more familiar with the typefaces and the inclusion of the instantly recognizable Yahtzee character and doggo. This inclusion of the gear wheel as well also lent itself to some great animation opportunities. My goal from the start was to give each of these shows a very clear color profile with the hope that it would pop out on the page and to give the entire channel a vibrant, colorful look. The next in line was semi-Ramblematic, Yahtzee's show dedicated more towards industry commentary. The brief for this show was more of a Yahtzee After Dark vibe, and so we pushed things towards more of a smoky, neon-lit aesthetic, taking the harsh red of fully Ramblematic and giving it a softer purple look. The animation of this was fun to make as well. Next was The Backdrop, Darren Mooney's new show focused on cinema commentary. This was a blast to create, and I spent some time playing around with the idea of having film reels in the logo itself. For the opening intro, I opted for a combination of animation where the film reel unravels to reveal the logo on top of some smoky live-action projector footage. The end result feels super classy. Then we had the Windbreaker podcast. I knew I wanted this one to be yellow to bring some sunshine to the channel. The Windbreaker name itself sounds so kinetic, and so the goal was to give this logo a sense of motion, hence the streaks coming off the letters. This type of logo takes a bit of trial and error to make sure all the letters are legible even when squished together and overlapping. I had some fun with the opening animation as well, where I built the W in 3D and used a Video Copilot's Element 3D and After Effects to make some frantic messes of objects. Very fun. Next up was Bite Sized, the channel's more straight down the line review show, and the brief for this was to have something a bit more cursive, which was odd since the word bite conjures up more of a rigid digital vibe in my head. I ended up having the background surrounding the logo carry this digital feeling as the green CRT effect breaks apart behind it. Following this was Firelink podcast, which as Dark Souls fans will know, is the name of one of the shrines found in the game. This was a cool starting point since the podcast really is like a group of people talking around a campfire. There's a kind of spiritual component to this as well, and so my first attempt was to create a fire silhouette that felt like it was from a church stained glass window. When looking closer, you can see the name Firelink buried in the flame. When scaling it up, you got some really interesting shapes out of the logo that could work as some interesting background patterns, especially with the stained glass texture selling the visual. Now, the one tricky thing about designing for YouTube is accommodating for all the different sizes and distances audiences are reading images at. In the end, it's important to make sure logos and text are legible, and in the end, it was agreed that this version of Firelink didn't play so well as a logo for YouTube. The next iteration was a lot simpler, and keeping things within the same vein as the stained glass window, I designed more of a shape-based logo out of a grid with the sword and campfire. Stoked on this version. Oh, and somewhere in the mix of all this was Yahtzee Tries, a show where Yahtzee tries, and I built this out of 3D and smashed the words together. But next up was Nick Calandra's journalistic/game industry commentary show called Unpacked. And this offered up a great challenge because the palette for this show wasn't a group of colors that came naturally to me. This felt like design hard mode, and it took me a little while to find my footing on this and grab onto a spark that felt worthy. In the end, the show is about examining specific parts of the industry, and so I ended up demonstrating this concept by having hand-drawn arrows select parts of the text. The intro animation also doubles down on this. The P is unpacked, examined, and repacked before the A is selected next. While I was doing all this, I also had my own show called Good Blood, which is the name of my own channel on YouTube. The logo was already done, but I had a great time rebuilding the Second Wind logo in 3D and experimenting with particle effects and camera movements. And now came one of the biggest projects, DevHeads Podcast, a show where 3 game developers, Jamate, Mikey, and Tina, come together with a special guest to discuss different aspects of game development. There were a lot of themes we wanted to incorporate with this one. Game dev itself, with the incorporation of building blocks or Lego bricks, the 3 hosts and their personalities, while also communicating the idea that by having 3 hosts, each from different corners of the game industry, the show is offering a more rounded conversation. From the get-go, I knew the way to do this was to have 3 different objects coming together to create a complete cube. With this, I jumped into Blender and whipped up a cube and broke it down into 3 different shapes, leaving an open space at the front to represent the guest. I spent a while experimenting with colors and shadows as well. Bringing these shapes into After Effects, I created the animation where audiences are introduced to each of the shapes first, before they spin around and connect to create the whole. Personifying the shapes by giving them faces also added a ton of personality to the whole thing as well. I thought it would be cool to have each of the faces be a different arrangement of the same few shapes. It was fun experimenting with seeing how many different face designs I could get out of the limited objects. To top things all off, I brought the finished animation over into Procreate on iPad and added some frame-by-frame animation to help with the motion. This gave the whole blocky nature a slightly more human feel with the messy lines. All this accompanied by a strong sound design and synth music track made for a really cool intro animation. And now we enter nostalgia land with the Rewind podcast and the archive. First was the Rewind podcast, a show based around discussing the movie industry. This had a very clear vision from the get-go, an 80s VHS aesthetic. This was fun to research and design. Then The Archive, a show spearheaded by Marty Sleever that looks backwards on the video games of the past that might have been overlooked. For this one, I wanted to capture the image of a vast library, hallways with rows of shelves that go on forever. And lastly, Battle Masters, kind of last man standing game show where contestants compete in specific video game challenges. This was a blast to make as well, and I ended up creating this cool skull with the crown on its head as the main brand mark. With the stark blood orange and black color palette, I was able to build out the rest of the assets for the show with player cards, etc. And that wraps up year 1 of Second Wind design. All up, it was a massive year with plenty of unique design opportunities. I hope you all enjoy the shows themselves, and we'll see what year 2 has in store.